Imagine for a moment that you're walking the dusty streets of Tombstone, Arizona, in 1881. The blazing sun beats down on your face, your boots squeak on the wooden sidewalks, and suddenly, you realize that all eyes are on you. A deathly silence descends upon the town. You've just broken an unwritten rule of the Wild West, a rule that could cost you your life in a matter of seconds. But which rule, and how the hell were you supposed to know? Well, if you were born in that era, your survival would depend not just on your marksmanship or courage, but on a complex set of unwritten codes that governed every aspect of life on the American frontier. These were the deadly codes of the Wild West, and mastering these rules was literally a matter of life or death. If you're enjoying this content, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what time are you watching this video? I'm curious to know if we have more nighttime cowboys or morning gunslingers around here. The American Old West, which flourished roughly between 1865 and 1890, was a land where federal law barely reached and where justice often came at the point of a gun. In this hostile environment, a unique social system developed based on codes of honor, mutual respect, and above all, survival. These codes were not written in any law book, but were known to all who dared venture beyond the established towns of the American East. Breaking these unwritten rules not only meant being frowned on by society, it often meant a death sentence, carried out on the spot. The first and perhaps most fundamental of these codes was the concept of word of honor. In the Old West, a man's word was literally all he possessed of unquestionable value. When someone gave their word, they were staking their reputation, their honor, and, in many cases, their life. Breaking a promise or breaking one's word was not only a moral issue, it was an offense that could result in a duel at dawn. This code arose from the practical need to establish trust in an environment where there were no courts, legal contracts, or reliable banking systems. If you couldn't trust someone's word, you simply couldn't do business with them. And doing business was essential to survival on the frontier. Honor was intrinsically linked to reputation, and your reputation in the Old West was built through your actions, not your words. A man could talk all he wanted about his courage, his skill with a weapon, or his integrity, but ultimately, it was his actions that defined who he truly was. This reputation functioned as social currency. A man with a good reputation found open doors, willing trading partners, and allies in times of need. Conversely, a man with a bad reputation found himself isolated, rejected, and often marked for death. The code of dueling was another fundamental aspect of life in the Old West. Contrary to what many Hollywood films portray, duels were not casual or impulsive events. They followed a strict protocol and were considered a last resort for resolving disputes that could not be resolved by other means. Dueling was seen as a civilized form of conflict resolution, a way to preserve the honor of both parties, even if one of them did not survive the encounter. There were specific rules governing how a duel should be conducted. The opponents must stand face to face at an agreed distance and must shoot simultaneously on the agreed signal. Shooting before the signal or in the back was considered murder, not a duel, and would result in relentless pursuit by the victim's friends and family. Hospitality in the Old West was more than a social courtesy. It was a matter of mutual survival. In an environment where towns were scarce and the distances between them were vast, offering shelter, food, and protection to travelers was not just an act of kindness, it was a moral obligation. This code of hospitality was reciprocal, based on the understanding that today you might be the host, but tomorrow you might be the one in need. Refusing hospitality to someone in need, especially during harsh winters or storms, was considered a near-criminal act. Conversely, abusing the hospitality offered, stealing from your host, or causing trouble on their property was a serious offense that often resulted in permanent banishment from the community. Or worse, respect for women was a sacred code in the Old West, though it must be understood within the context of the time. Women were scarce on the frontier, and their presence was valued not only for sentimental reasons, but also for practical reasons. They brought stability, basic medical care, education for children, and domestic skills essential to civilized life. Insulting, threatening, or worse. Assaulting a woman was considered one of the most serious crimes a man could commit. The punishment for such acts was often death, carried out not by a court, but by a group of outraged men from the community. This code also extended to the protection of women's reputations. Spreading malicious rumors about a woman or publicly questioning her virtue was considered as serious as a physical attack. Loyalty was another fundamental pillar of the Old West codes. Once you aligned yourself with someone, whether as a business partner, a member of a cowboy crew, or simply as a friend, that loyalty was expected to last until death. Betraying a comrade, especially in times of danger, was considered the most despicable act a man could commit. This betrayal not only resulted in social ostracism, but often a death sentence carried out by former comrades. Loyalty also extended to families and clans. Attacking a family member meant declaring war on the entire family, resulting in feuds that could last for generations. The code of silence was equally important. In the Old West, asking too many questions about someone's past was considered rude and potentially dangerous. Many men seeking a new life on the frontier were fleeing something, whether it was the law, debt, or simply a life they no longer wanted. As long as a man behaved honorably in his new life, his past was considered irrelevant. This code allowed people to start over, but it also created an environment where many people's true identities remained a mystery. Breaking this code, probing too deeply, or divulging information about someone's past could result in a deadly confrontation. Justice in the Old West was often a matter of personal interpretation. In the absence of a formal legal system, communities developed their own methods of dealing with crimes and disputes. Mob justice, or lynching, while morally questionable by modern standards, was seen at the time as a practical necessity. When a serious crime was committed and there was no sheriff or judge available to handle the situation, the community assumed responsibility. This primitive system of justice was based on the belief that some crimes were so serious that they could not go unpunished, regardless of the absence of formal legal authorities. The code of self-sufficiency was fundamental to survival on the frontier. Expecting others to solve one's problems or take care of one's needs was seen as weakness and unacceptable dependence. Each man was expected to take care of himself, his family, and his property. This included knowing how to shoot, ride a horse, work with his hands, trade, and, if necessary, fight. This self-sufficiency did not mean isolation, but rather the ability to contribute to the community rather than be a burden to it. Physical courage was highly valued, but true courage in the Old West was not simply the absence of fear, but the ability to act correctly despite fear. A brave man was not necessarily one who never felt fear, but one who did what had to be done, regardless of the personal consequences. This courage manifested itself in many ways: defending the weak, keeping one's word even when it became inconvenient or dangerous, and facing superior opponents when honor was at stake. Respect for private property was absolute in the Old West. In an environment where subsistence often depended on a few animals, tools, or supplies, stealing was not only a crime, it was potentially a death sentence for the victim. For this reason, theft of horses, cattle, or essential supplies was punished extremely severely, often with death. This code also extended to respect for property markers, grazing rights, and water sources. Disputes over property were taken very seriously and could result in prolonged conflicts between families or entire communities. The word coward in the Old West was one of the worst accusations that could be leveled against a man. Cowardice referred not only to physical fear, but also to a lack of moral integrity. A coward was someone who shied away from their responsibilities, betrayed their comrades in times of need, or preyed on the weak while avoiding fair confrontation. Being labeled a coward resulted in complete social ostracism and often forced the individual to leave the community permanently. The code of fair play was fundamental in confrontations. Even in life or death situations, certain rules were expected to be followed. Shooting in the back, attacking a man when he was drunk or defenseless, or using unfair numerical advantage were all serious violations of this code. A man who won through dishonest methods earned not respect, but rather distrust and eventually retaliation. Victory through fair means, on the other hand, even over an enemy, often resulted in mutual respect. Temperance with alcohol, while it may seem contradictory to the popular image of the Old West, was actually an important code. While drinking was common and socially accepted, losing control due to alcohol was seen as a dangerous weakness. A drunk man could not defend himself or others, could not make sound decisions, and often caused unnecessary trouble. Those who could not control their drinking quickly lost the respect of the community and often found themselves in dangerous situations. The code of hard work was fundamental in frontier society. Laziness was not only frowned upon, it was potentially fatal in an environment where survival depended on constant effort. Each person was expected to contribute to the community through productive labor. This could mean working on the farm, mining, building, trading, or any number of other necessary activities. Those who tried to live off others without contributing were quickly expelled from the community. Education and knowledge, though not formalized, were highly valued in the Old West. A man who could read and write, who understood basic medicine, who knew the law, or who possessed specialized technical skills was a valuable addition to any community. This knowledge not only increased one's chances of survival, but also increased the individual's value to the community as a whole. The code of revenge was perhaps one of the most dangerous aspects of life in the Old West. When a man or his family were wronged or attacked, revenge was not only a right but often an obligation. This revenge had to be proportionate to the original offense and carried out according to codes of fair play, but it was expected and respected by the community. Failure to seek revenge for a serious offense resulted in a loss of respect and social status. Solidarity in times of crisis was a code that held communities together. When natural disasters, indigenous attacks, or other dangers threatened the community, all personal disputes were temporarily put aside. Everyone was expected to contribute to the common defense, regardless of their personal differences. Failure to support the community in times of crisis was considered treason and resulted in permanent banishment. Respect for elders and experienced men was fundamental in frontier society. Older men who had survived the dangers of the Wild West were seen as repositories of valuable knowledge. Their opinions were sought in disputes, their advice was valued in practical matters, and their stories were listened to attentively. Disrespecting a respected elder was seen as a grave offense against the entire community. The code of constant preparedness was essential for survival. A wise man in the Old West was always prepared for the possibility of conflict, natural disaster, or emergency. This meant keeping weapons clean and loaded, horses healthy and well-trained, adequate supplies, and skills sharp. A lack of preparedness not only put oneself at risk, but could also endanger others who depended on one for help. Discretion was valued almost as much as courage. Knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to act and when to wait, when to engage and when to walk away were skills that separated those who survived from those who didn't. Indiscretion could result in unnecessary conflicts, dangerous enemies, and situations that could have been avoided with a little more wisdom. The code of reciprocity governed many social interactions in the Old West. Favors were expected to be returned, kindnesses were expected to be reciprocated, and insults were expected to be balanced. This system of give and take kept social relationships in balance and created a network of mutual obligations that strengthened the community as a whole. Adaptability was crucial to survival on the frontier. Conditions could change rapidly. New threats could emerge unexpectedly, and those who were too rigid in their methods often didn't survive. A wise man learned to adapt to circumstances, to learn new skills when necessary, and to change his strategies when old ones no longer worked. The code of balanced generosity was important for maintaining good relations. While generosity was valued, being overly generous could be seen as weakness or an attempt to buy favors. Conversely, being stingy or selfish resulted in social isolation. The right balance varied depending on the circumstances, but finding it was crucial for social success. Strategic patience was a virtue in the Old West. While quick action was often necessary, there were also situations where patience was the best strategy. waiting for the right moment to act, allowing situations to develop before intervening, and resisting the temptation to react impulsively were all valuable skills. That could mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death. The code of frugality was practical in an environment where resources were scarce. Wasting food, water, ammunition, or any other valuable resource was seen as irresponsible. Those who were careful with their resources not only ensured their own survival but also demonstrated wisdom that was respected by the community. Constant vigilance was a necessity on the frontier. Dangers could arise at any moment, whether from wild animals, bandits, extreme weather, or personal disputes that escalated into violence. Those who let their guard down often paid with their lives. This vigilance extended not only to the physical environment, but also to the social and political dynamics of the community. The Code of Strategic Forgiveness recognized that not all offenses needed to result in deadly conflict. For minor offenses, especially those committed by inexperienced youth or individuals under extreme stress, forgiveness could be not only appropriate, but strategically wise. However, this forgiveness needed to be balanced with the need to maintain respect and not be seen as weakness. Careful neutrality was important in disputes between others. Taking sides unnecessarily in others' conflicts could create enemies without corresponding benefit. A wise man learned when to engage and when to remain neutral, basing that decision on his own interests and principles, not on external pressures. The Code of Honorable Death recognized that in such a dangerous environment, death was a constant possibility. How a man died was considered as important as how he lived. Dying courageously, defending principles, or protecting others was seen as the most honorable way to leave this world. This perspective on death influenced how men lived, encouraging them to live by their codes so that, if death came, it would find them worthy. These Old West codes were not merely social conventions. They were literally matters of life and death. They evolved from the practical needs of survival in a hostile environment where traditional civilization had not yet fully established itself. While they may seem primitive or even brutal by modern standards, they provided a social framework that allowed communities to function and individuals to survive in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Understanding these codes helps us understand not only American history, but also how human societies adapt and create order even under the most challenging conditions. The American Old West was a unique social laboratory where men and women were forced to create new forms of social organization based on the immediate realities of their situation, not on inherited traditions or abstract theories. These deadly codes of the Old West represent a fascinating chapter in human history, showing how the need for survival can shape entire societies and create value systems that persist far beyond the circumstances that created them. Today, as we face our own modern challenges, perhaps there are lessons to be learned from these unwritten codes that governed one of the most iconic eras in American history.